Hi.
Hi.
I'm sort of uniquely non-academic.
Yay.
Well, you know, I'm an outlier. So I publish, Exterminating Angel Press publishes books of all genres, I mean, as many as I can manage and afford, as long as they question the dominant cultural story of dominance and submission. So, and my work also is, as Diana said, visionary fiction. I'm writing the 5th book right now, The History of Arcadia, which is essentially about how can a small, human, value-centered culture survive surrounded by a huge technocratic, imperialist, environmentally degraded structure. I don't know where I got that idea. But anyway, I thought I should write a book on it. So I was thrilled to find out about this conference because one of the most important things to me is to get all sorts of different disciplines together to be talking about the same thing, rather than separating the disciplines into ghettos. And so this has been like the most fun for me. It's like a candy store to go to all these different panels and hear people addressing all of these issues from different perspectives, right? So I'm going to start with, I'll tell you why these are in your seats in a minute. I want to start with a quote from Jason W. Moore, whose work I admire tremendously. "What mode of knowledge," he said, "is appropriate for the planetary crisis," I should use it, shouldn't I, "of the 21st century?" So, one mode is science, correct? Oh, thank you. Free at last.
People want you to be bound.
Thank you. One mode's science, one mode's art. They're obviously linked. To me, the best mode of knowledge is one that includes fantasy, dreams, anything that's equal, what we think of as irrational right now. That is actually a partner to rational thought. What we think of as rational, I would argue that what we think of as rational is right now a ghetto, essentially, for rationality. The writer, the social activist writer Walida Marisha, defined visionary fiction, which I finally figured out is what I write because she defined it, as visionary fiction encompasses all of the fantastic with an arc always blending towards social justice. So I was thrilled to find out that I was going to be on a panel talking about Kim Stanley Robinson's books, and I have to say I sped read the Mars books and 2140, and it's all visionary fiction. I mean, science fiction encompasses this because it has these elements, as long as it's arcing towards social justice and struggling with how do we become more human, essentially, is the question that interests me. I think it was in one of your books where I found out that evolution actually means originally the unrolling of a book. So that was quite exciting. Because to me, books also are reflecting our inner space, and inner space to me is the final frontier. We have been doing an awful lot of exploring in outer space, but we have done, in Western culture, relatively little exploring of inner space. And there have been so many panels here. Rose's presentation this morning was about the exploration of inner space in the Aboriginal culture. And there have been several other panels where I've heard the same words being used that are really important to me. Dreaming, fantasy, evolution rather than revolution, right? Or Sam. Anyway, Sam's panel was for... You're another Sam. I mean the other one.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm sure you were into that too. Hey, Lana, you're late.
We've done this before.
So,
where is Sam?
So what I wanted to start with was, when we talk about utopia and dystopia, if we're like fighting dystopia, right, with the idea of utopia, we're going like this. That's why you got this.
Right? What was that again?
Thanks. Here's my claque there. Utopia and dystopia, because, you know, utopia doesn't exist. I mean, utopia is a static thing. So one of the things that used to drive me crazy about the science fiction of my youth, which was, forgive me, mostly written by white males, was it was very dystopic. And I think that that's really, really important. I think it's really important to have defined what our problems are. But once you've defined what our problems are, if you just stay there, you're in what Jason Moore calls the ecology of hopelessness. And that's useless, I mean, for where we are right now. Correct? I think so. Oh, can you go to 2? That was it. Sorry. Now, how do you get out of that? So you need creativity. You need creativity, and you also need to relax a little bit. Oh, I can't get out of it at all. You need to look at the problem in a new way. We need some kind of new pattern.
You need
Correct?
to stop struggling.
You need to stop struggling. And you need to accept that the other side is one side of your side. All right? Can you get the next one? So kind of the way I feel, oh wow, those are terrible. Oh, sorry about that.
Can we turn down the lights a tiny bit?
Yeah.
Thanks, Kai.
I'm really bad at PowerPoint, so I think I probably loaded
No.
this wrong.
I think it's the light.
No, it's really, yeah,
Oh, there we
there
go.
we go.
Okay, that's the way I feel sometimes when I'm reading present day stuff. I feel like we're all walking into this maze that we can't get out of, and it's a really ugly one. And it's really restrictive. And it's really defined by the words that we use rather than the feelings that we have, right? Because we definitely valorize words over feelings, for sure, as a culture, which I do not think is necessarily a good thing. So what's outside the maze? How do we get out of it? Rogelio, please. Thank you. So it's all hands on deck, don't you think, right now? I mean, we're in a position right now where every single discipline needs to be focusing on how we are going to transform ourselves, correct? How we are going to evolve. And the first and most basic question is, what does it mean to be human? Seriously. Now, we are biological creatures. We are animals. And what we do is we make stories. The way that bees make honey, right? The way that spiders make webs, we make stories. That is our way forward, is making stories. Stories explore our deepest desires as humans, and it's also play. And from play comes creativity and comes ideas for the future. There's a wonderful book by a guy named Gustav Kuhn that I found totally by accident. He's a magician and a neuroscientist, which I thought was devastatingly fascinating, and that's why I bought the book. It's called Experiencing the Impossible. And one of the things that Kuhn, K-U-H-N, one of the things that he and his group discovered, he's got a magic, I don't remember what it's called, the magic something in Goldsmiths in England. One of the things they discovered was they showed kids, two different groups of kids, clips from Harry Potter movies. One group of kids just saw a clip from the Harry Potter movies that was just plot. One group saw magic in the clip, and then they tested them for creativity afterward. The kids that saw the magic tested much higher in creativity immediately after seeing it. Okay? And the reason for that was they were taken out of themselves and saying, how did that happen? And it started making them think more creatively than when they saw something that they understood. Right? So when we see those kind of stories and we say, oh, they're just children's stories, it's very important. It's very important that children get them, but it's really important that we get them too. That we continue to see things that we don't understand, which we do in the external world all the time with technology. But what about the things we don't understand in the internal world? The irrational, magic, all the things that we're told can't actually happen, which I happen to know whenever I talk to people in person and I say, oh, you know, this has happened to me. They always look around and they go, you know what happened to me? And almost everyone has got an irrational story that they don't want to share with anybody else because they think they're crazy, right? So don't worry, you're not crazy. It happened to everybody. So, one more time. Okay? So there's always two different ways to look at things. That's that famous square that my friend Lanny there wanted me to put up, where you can either see the front facing left, or you can see, I can't even flip it, or you can see the front going up and facing right. You can't see them both at the same time, but they're both there. So we also need to remember that when we are thinking that the other side isn't seeing reality, they may just be seeing the other side. And it may be better to put those two things together rather than fighting over it. It's a waste of time. We don't have time to waste. We need to get moving, right? Move on, right? So fantasy is a wonderful perspective. Visionary fiction, fantasy, myth, fairy tales. In my books, what they found is that fairy tales tell all the biological truths of human beings. That's what the physicists in my Arcadia have discovered and what they're working on. In Ursula K. Le Guin's work, she's a fantasy science fiction writer, and we all know a fantastic one. She's a very good example of this. She says that the favorite line she ever wrote was in the book The Left Hand of Darkness, and the line was, "The king was pregnant." because in the left hand of darkness on that planet, people change sex suddenly and go into heat when they change sex. If they change to a woman, they go into heat immediately, and they can change back to males, and they're going to be pregnant, they have children. Well, think what that would mean if we had a king who was pregnant. It would be totally different than the structures we have right now. I mean, it makes your mind go, meow, which is just really what good art should do. In this picture, it's an illustration of the set piece in the book where the hero, who is from another planet, who's observing this planet in a benign way, he has to escape with his best friend, who's a minister, who's the prime minister of this country. And they have to do a torturous cross-Arctic trek. Midway across, the prime minister turns into a woman. And it completely flummoxes the narrator. They don't know how to relate to each other anymore, because usually crossing that kind of Arctic scene in a book with two men, you know how that's going to go. What happens when all of a sudden it's a woman and you want to have sex with her and she wants to have sex with you, but you can't because you're trying to get it? I mean, I was like, this is so good. I love this book. It flips your expectation and it opens up new landscapes of both desire and possibilities of partnership that you don't think about. And that's a fantasy book. It's a science fiction fantasy book, right? So in the Mars books, for example, there are lots of fantasy elements. And here, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to speak up from one of the books that I think is actually one of the best books of the 20th century.
Okay,
Wind in
so
the Willows.
plot spoilers.
Wind in the Willows. Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows. Now, how many people are sitting here going, it's just a children's book? I hope you're not. It's mostly thought of as a children's book, but it dramatizes in the most amazing way all of human longing and every human relationship. It talks about friendship, it talks about love and home and family, it talks about desire for safety, desire for adventure, desire for novelty, desire for kindness. Things that make us human. It actually helps that it's animals that are doing this in this book. Now, the Mars trilogy dramatizes all of these things as well. The meaning of being human is being dramatized in both Wind in the Willows and in the Mars books, and also in 2140, actually. In fact, in Red Mars, one of the key moments, which is one of the most touching moments to me, is when Anne, who's a scientist who loves rocks because she's been so traumatized when she was young, she is traveling with some fellow scientists, and she realizes suddenly that she's totally isolated from them, and it actually makes her really, gives her pain. So how does she solve this? She joins in a meal with them, and she washes the dishes. And that really touched me, you know. I mean, that's not what you think of in a science fiction book. You don't think, oh, they're going to be washing the dishes. But it was just like Badger giving a wonderful meal to Molly and Water Ratty after Molly had been terrorized in the wild wood. That was what it reminded me of immediately. It was that sense of companionship, safety, having a moment to rest with companions before you move on into more adventures. So I hope you don't mind that I compared your books to Wind in the Willows there. I know, it's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. I have 2 copies, and I keep one by my bed and one by my desk, and when I'm depressed, I read it. Especially, what I really love is the one where Molly realizes that he's far from home, and he so misses it, even though his home's not as nice as the one he's living in with Ratty. And he has to go back, and he cries, and he says, Rat, I have to go back. And they go back, and he has all these little bits, and I really relate to that. So, what humans desire is what makes us truly human, really. And I think that we can't forget about that that's really our goal, is to become ever more human. There's a scientist who, I wish I'd figured this out, I wish I'd gotten the quote when I saw it originally. Somebody asked some scientist at one point, will we ever find the missing link? And he said, we have found the missing link. It's us, right? And I think it's true. I think we're reaching to become more human all the time. And we're at a place in our culture where we may go backward. So it's not really a good idea, I don't think. Can you go on? So one of our desires is to live in harmony with nature and to live in harmony with animals, right? Or in my case, to have a dress like that. I would love to have a dress like that. I don't think I look as good in it as she does, but can you get the next one, please? That's another desire. You know, when we think about these fantasy cities, there's our desire. Our desire is to live in harmony in a city that provides all the stimulus we want. The food, the companionship, the fun, like the fun we've been having here. It reaches into the past as well to come up with ideas for the future, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that Diana says she's addicted to science fiction and that young people have a fascination with fantasy right now. I mean, I've read a lot of pedagogical things that say that young people's desire for fantasy is actually retrograde, right? They should be focusing on the outside world. No, it's not true. The fact that fantasy is having a renaissance right now is actually a sign of a deep desire for going into the inner world and looking into what makes us more human. So, it's kind of cut off, but so my idea is, my answer to Jason's question about what mode of knowledge is actually most effective right now is imagination. Because imagination is what gets you over the maze and gets you to look out at the landscape, at what we might think is impossible right now, but maybe isn't once you get up there. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody else.